What's up?
Not much. The trans community hates me.
Well, yeah, I
It's
mean, you've been pretty fucking rowdy lately.
what did I say that was rowdy? Destiny. Name one rowdy thing.
I'm pretty sure it's the general characterization of you constantly shitting on trans women and their desire to pass.
No, no, no. Okay, well, a little bit. I think that the desire to pass is sort of it's a goal that I think is elevated unfairly, oftentimes, or to the detriment of the people who are pursuing it. Just because I think that passing,
I'm familiar with this.
okay.
I am the master of the destiny strategy. So you've tweeted
Yeah.
something that's most likely completely and totally indefensible, and now you've come here to tell me
No,
that,
it's not
well,
indefensible
actually,
at all.
the problem with passing is that when you elevate it to a standard that's unattainable by most people will never be happy with the results ultimately of them trying to pass. Most people don't have the money available to get the surgeries they need to pass, and a lot of people have gone through male puberties that are too dangerous or destructive to their bodies to ever pass as well as some of the idealized trans women are put in front of people that are they're supposed to look like. Is that what your argument is?
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. The
Okay.
other part of it is like I tweeted, trans women look like men. That's what I tweeted. That's my spicy take, which I think that like there are different ways to interpret this. The sort of pedantic way that's like
Sure.
annoying is to be like, well, you're saying that trans women look like the average man, which is not true. I'm just saying that like I don't think that trans women pass um, as a general rule. And that's my take. Is that like insane?
No, but I don't think that's. I feel like a lot of the big problems were that like I don't care actually. Fuck it, we'll be really personal. Do you think you don't
Yeah,
pass?
be very personal. I think that when I'm like on camera and when I can get like my makeup right and the angles right, and I can like focus really hard on trying to pass, I think that I can do like a pretty good job of it and that I will pass probably like 99%. And maybe there's it's like a little bit off.
Haven't we
But
joked about? I'm leaking our DMs now. Haven't we
oh
joked about how
boy.
you've been on panels with people before who are like hitting on you and have no fucking idea that you're trans?
And I think that that is like it gets to the heart of how passing is sort of a difficult issue because most people who pass don't pass all the time.
Sure.
And I think that like I fall into this category where like no matter how hard I try, there will be like some percentage where I can't get to like 100%. Um, and I think that like for most trans women did not start transition at 14,
Sure.
right? And
Oh, did
they
you?
didn't, yeah, I did.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
I also have spent like tens of thousands of dollars on surgery, like
Sure.
on my jaw, for example.
That good FFS
And
bullshit or whatever, right?
yeah, I didn't get like full FFS,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I did get some surgery. And even with all of that, I still don't like fully pass. So I think that it is like not crazy to say that one, this is like an unattainable goal for a lot of trans women. And then when you like set ourselves up for failure by establishing it as like a baseline to be seen as like valid or like legitimate. And I also think that like we would do a lot better if we sort of accepted ourselves and didn't work ourselves up into these communities where we're sort of all clapping each other on the back and saying like, "Oh, you passed so well, you're so great." Because I think we like insulate ourselves in a bubble where we're really not like adapted to reality, and it makes us really susceptible to people who being like, "You don't pass," and that just being like crushing. So yeah.
I think that there is a I agree with I think I agree with most of what you're saying. I think that one of the big problems with the trans community is I think a lot of fake trans people have fucking destroyed it from the inside out. I don't know. You're familiar with the concept, of course, of self ID, right? I think this is something that needed to be like killed in the cradle. I think self ID and everything relating to it, and the idea that you're trans if you say you're trans, and it's just about like saying that you are and IDing as it. Like I think that that shit has because I think that what that did was that allowed a lot of fake trans people to get into the movement and be a part of it, and then their ideas that honestly should be completely ignored because they're not trans, they have no idea what that experience is about, started to become like almost, at least online, it feels, or in the colleges and online, it feels like those have become like the predominant trans voices. So I think sometimes you're in this really weird world as a trans person where some people are telling you that like you don't even need to pass, that we can have male lesbians and we can have trans women with beards, and like anybody can go to whatever bathroom they want. It doesn't matter what you look like gender expression is like bullshit, and we all are gender abolitionists. And I think that those voices start to become the loudest ones, and then try to navigate that area as a trans person just becomes like impossible, basically, I think.
Yeah, I think that trans people, we really get it from both sides, where on one hand, I can sort of come off as this like ultra SJW person because I'm telling people like, you don't need to pass to be happy. And that should be like, if anything, an ancillary goal. But at the same time, when I came out and started transitioning, I think that like becoming a woman, trying to present a certain way, it really meant a very different thing than it does today. And I think that the conception of what a woman is on the left has totally evaporated. So like, you know, a woman doesn't have to look any sort of way. And then we're kind of lost. We're like, when we erase the boundaries for this category, no one knows what they're doing. I want to say that like, it's not a bad thing to try to pass and to like, in many ways, like really care for yourself and to try to make yourself presentable. Those are all valuable things. But I think that people do get caught too much up on trying to reach like a goal. And this is another thing, this is going to lead into the other trans drama that I've been on, where like I've talked about how I feel disappointed in my transition. And when I say that, people get really angry at me and they say things like, will you pass? Or you look really good, so how can you be disappointed? And the reason I'm disappointed is because I've gone through all of this effort. And although that I look a lot more feminine than I used to, the mental health component hasn't really improved that much. It has improved a little bit, but that I think is the real goal of transition, is to improve the mental health state. And I think that when we like replace passing for that, when we substitute the goal of mental health improvement with the goal of passing, one, it sets people up for failure. But two, it also means that like we kind of lose track of what really matters. And then when people are struggling, those voices just get shut out because it's like, well, you shouldn't, you shouldn't be upset. You have no right to be upset because you've achieved this status.
I think that the difficult thing is that when my son got diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm trying to think of whether or not I want to put him on medication, one of the things that weighed heavily on me was that being like a kid is hard, and he already had some things working against him. He has something called van der Wood syndrome, which is like, it can present in a few different ways, some extreme, some not. His is milder, but it impacts I think it's his glottal stop in the back of his throat. So when he talks, sometimes it can sound nasally even still. We're still not sure if we should get surgery
French.
for it. Yeah, maybe a little bit, yeah. And my thought was at the time, whether or not I wanted to get him on medication or not, I was like, damn, like being a kid is already difficult. It's already really hard to be a child. And the idea of him having to fight with like ADHD and everything on top of all of that just seems so shitty. I feel like it's my job as a parent to like put him in the best position possible. So, we consulted physicians, we went to the ups and downs of medications, like, yeah, okay, we'll have him get medication for his ADHD. So at least there's one less thing that he's got to fuck with. I think for a trans person, transitioning is, I think one problem might be, is that in your point of view, like if you transition, this should alleviate like a lot of mental health things. But I think that all transitioning does is if you transition, and if you transition perfectly, let's assume that, and even that's not gonna happen, but if you transition perfectly, all that does is it gets you to the baseline of now you can begin to take the rest of your mental health seriously too. But transitioning in and of itself is not going to fix any of the problems you have in life. It's just going to give you like a starting ground to where it's like, oof, okay, I'm fucking 18 to 22. It's already a really complicated period. My early life has probably been fucked as well because being trans and all of that is a bunch of deals. Now that I'm transitioned, like it's not like everything's magically going to get better. Now it's like at least this is one thing I don't have to worry about, and now you can begin working the other stuff. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to be done past the transitioning part.
I mean, it's complicated because transition is like the transition we're talking about is a medical intervention. And I and my parents made the decision to have that medical intervention when I was an adolescent. You're talking about maybe putting your son on meds The problem is that when you transition, you also introduce all of these other issues. So, like, I grew up in a rural Colorado town, and as a result of transitioning, I ended up, I think, very socially ostracized. And so, while there were certain advantages, like, yes, it's helped me pass better, there's also been disadvantages. So I spent a lot of time on the internet growing up. I didn't have a lot of friends.
Hmm.
And these are things that I think affected me a lot going forwards. And so I look back at that and the pros and cons of transitioning. And I wonder, maybe this helped me pass a little bit better now. But if passing isn't the goal and this has had like negative, detrimental mental health effects,
Hmm.
maybe it wasn't worth it to transition when I did. And so
Well, wait, would you have
this kind
transitioned
of,
like later or earlier or?
yeah, maybe when I think like transitioning later can be definitely a good decision.
Wait, as
Um,
a trans woman, you really think so?
I do. And it's like part of why I think that passing should not be like the only goal. Because I think that when passing becomes the primary goal and we forget this mental health aspect, I think we can sometimes encourage people to take actions that maybe on the whole, balance wise, would be worse. And
I
that's,
think
historical counterfactual. I don't know if it would
sure.
be
I
worse,
mean, like, I can
but
understand proceeding with caution for people. Like, I do think
mhm.
that, like, the wild affirmation and everything is super cringe. And I think it's totally fine to push back really hard against that type of idea. But I feel like for trans women, like, some people just have, like, really brutal puberties. Like, they're, like, the most chiseled jawed, manly men, broad shouldered. And at that point, like, you're fucked. Like, if you're a trans woman, like, forget passing. Like, you're going to be like feeling like a man in a dress for the rest of your life. Like, it seems like you're in such a rough state at that point. If somebody could get ID'd earlier as trans, why would you not avoid the puberty?
Well, I'll answer this in two ways.
Hmm.
One is like with anecdote, and to say that a lot of trans women that I know
Hmm.
who pass beautifully still struggle a lot with mental health issues.
Sure.
And then I don't know if you've looked into the literature on this. There's this like great systematic review that came out in 2021 that looks at all of these studies on HRT and
Hmm.
its benefits for mental health. And what it finds is that all of the studies point in one direction. So, like, overwhelmingly, the studies indicate that there's probably a benefit to mental health with transition.
Hmm.
However, there's a catch, and the catch is that the studies overall have like pretty weak power as far as strength of evidence. So, there are a lot of surveys, there are a lot of studies that don't take into effect confounding variables and all of these other issues.
Hmm.
And so we're not actually that confident in the benefit of HRT. And
Yeah,
I think
this
that's
is why I
another
argue with
reason
anyone that's
to
like, oh,
caution.
like puberty blockers have been super well studied. Like, we know that this is good. And it's like, bro,
Mhm.
this all of this shit is like very like new. Yeah,
And
in
we
terms of
have
like,
much less evidence for
mhm.
adolescents.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
like, think of all the evidence we have for trans people and reduce it by like 1/100.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what we have for adolescents.
Hmm.
So I think that's why when I say like do not transition, part of that's just like dysphoria on my part and being like dramatic.
Hmm.
But I think that like the underlying kernel of truth is that like you should be very careful if you're going to transition. And if you do, I would encourage people to make sure that they have other mental health aspects like checked out
Hmm.
and that their goals are very realistic, that they're not like wanting to be, a beautiful woman or like an anime girl or a porn star or something. Because realistically, like there's a high probability that you will not fully pass.
Sure, potentially, yeah. Do you think you'd be happier if you never tried to transition?
I don't know. I, hmm. I would say that I think transition has helped my mental health a little bit. Um, but that's very hard to like
Yeah, it's hard to
disentangle, right?
counterfactual. Like, what would I be like if I was a full-on man right now, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that like in the strongest version of the counterfactual, you ask the question like, would I be healthier if instead of transitioning, I just went to like get cognitive behavioral therapy and like made a bunch of friends and was like very pro-social and built up this network of support and all of these things. And like maybe in that, then yeah, I would be happier. But that's also like a quite unrealistic scenario. And so it's hard to tell. But yeah, I think that there's not really a place for a lot of trans people in society. And I think the reason for that is because trans women are trying to become women, and that is very hard to do. Oftentimes they end up in a spot in society where they're not really seen as women by people. Um, and so they're just constantly pursuing this goal and failing. I think it would be wonderful if there was like, if trans people could just be like accepted as they are, maybe as like a third gender, and to be like, listen, you're trans, you don't fully pass, but that's okay. And we're going to support you, and we're going to allow you the freedom to present the way that you want without increasing or adding on all of this extra baggage that comes with the expectations to fit into a very specific role of what it means to be a woman.
Two parts. So for the first thing, do you think that at one part of this, I hate that I'm using this phrase because people use it against me all the time, but do you think that a lot of this might be a little bit like super Twittery? Because I feel like I've heard of, like, there are people in real life that seem to pass, that can go into that can be around even if they might think they don't. And also I would say too, trans people are probably really hypersensitive about like not passing, in that like I guarantee you that like a trans woman probably knows way more features of like a cis woman than a cis woman knows, right? That I'm sure that you guys have ways where you can spot like fucking like I can tell by the fucking jaw,
too long.
yeah, I know that this, you had this fucking, like trans people probably spot it, and you see that, and like a cis person be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But and as evidence of this, something that I think is like kind of funny is that like you can throw a trans, and also some of this gets a little bit backward rationalized, because you can throw a trans flag into a lot of women's profiles and people will just assume they're trans. Like that, I'm pretty sure that Sock Darling chick has, I've seen in her mentions whenever she's tweeting on some shit where I'm tweeting about trans people, there are a lot of guys there that will talk about how she's trans and that's why she's upset or whatever. And I don't think she is, right?
She's not.
Yeah. So like shit like that happens. So people will become like hypersensitive to like trying to like spot the trans person. That's one part. A second part, and this is something I can only go by what other people say because I'm not trans, so I can't know. But like the second part is that it feels like the accepting a person, and this is also where like the self-ID brain has come in, and I don't know, like the conversations are harder to follow. The idea that like, I wish that people could just accept me as a trans woman instead of me trying to become a woman, that seems like a statement that some trans people might make, especially maybe from the self-ID crowd. But I feel like a lot of people that are like trans women or trans men, they don't want to be trans. They just want to be the other gender. And even if they were like locked in a room by themselves, like the way that they see their body, the way that they feel about themselves, that can be almost completely independent from how society views them. They personally just have a desire to like present as that other gender because it's what they feel internally, and they want that external presentation to match that internal identity.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think these people, trans people in general, want to be the opposite sex, right? And
but like, so I'm saying the only thing just on that, and there you go, yeah, is that like they wouldn't be happy in a society where it's like, oh, listen, like you're not a woman, but I super love trans women. Like you're really cool, and I see you as a trans woman, and that's like awesome. Like they would be like, that's like, I don't want to be seen as a trans woman. I'd rather be seen as an ugly woman or a butch woman than a trans woman, than feel like you see me as a man. That's the feeling that I get when in terms of trans people I talk to. Yeah, then go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that if I can imagine how some people would respond to what I'm saying, someone might say that like, well, Taff, you're saying that I should just like be happy and accept like that my body is sort of masculine, but if I could do that, there would be no problem. Like I wouldn't transition at all if it was as simple as just like accepting my masculinity and being okay with that. And so I recognize that. And I also recognize that like what the goal of transition for a lot of people is to become, the opposite sex. What but like, and this is maybe like where it gets sort of controversial, but like, I don't think that's possible. Like, I don't think that like a trans woman can become a woman in a real sense. I think that she can become like someone who looks like a woman such that everyone treats her that way. But I think that even that goal, like becoming someone who looks like a woman such that everyone treats you that way, is oftentimes like a very unrealistic goal. So I think that like what we should be doing is trying to manage dysphoria. And I
Yeah,
think
I
that like
understand.
I
don't
one
disagree with
of
what
the
you're
ways you
saying.
manage dysphoria.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but we have to be careful because we're like, I feel like we're conflating a ton of different topics like all together. Like managing expectations is important. That's totally different on whether should somebody try to transition at all. Whether should somebody try to transition at all is totally different than like, is it important how society perceives you? Whether or not you get additional mental health services after transitioning is totally separate from all of those things. Like I agree with some of what you're saying, but I feel like you're roping in a lot of concepts together that are completely and totally disaggregated, or like we can disentangle all of these things. They don't have to be spoken about the same thing. So like the first thing you talked about when you kind of came in here talking about is that like transition didn't solve all your problems. That's probably true, but I think like transitioning and doing nothing else would be the equivalent of like getting an SSRI prescription and never going to therapy or changing anything in your life. You're probably not going to change at all, right? Maybe give you a like very, 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 very slight boost, but for the most part, you're still going to feel like shit and nothing's going to change. So like I would agree that you need to get more services afterwards after you transition. But whether or not you do or don't transition in pre-puberty is a fundamentally separate question from like what should people's expectations be, right? Managing expectations is important regardless of our other thoughts. But yeah, just be careful in like wrapping I think all of these up together as like one thing, because I think these are all separate issues that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, so going back to what I said about transition not fixing all of my problems,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just that I transitioned and that fixed one problem, the trans thing, and then I had other mental health issues. What I'm trying to communicate is that I transitioned and it didn't fix the trans problem. So I still had significant dysphoria. And sometimes people will say to me like, oh, well, you just like don't have dysphoria. This isn't an issue for you. And that's going to be more, further from the truth. I have very intense dysphoria. And that's the problem. The problem is that I transitioned and that it helped a little bit with dysphoria, but it didn't really go as far as I think it was sold to me, as how far it would go. So, and
Do you
in
think
myself,
that, just so I'm kind of curious, do you think that hanging out in online spaces affects that? Like, let's say, for instance, you completely disconnected from online shit because online, like, you're like a fucking trans advocate, trans debater, Taftaj, the trans woman, trans, like you're trans, like everybody is, it's part of your identity. Whereas I feel like, what if you were like in real life for, like a week or two, like just hanging out with people on like a college campus or like you did like normal shit. I don't know how many, well, from appearances, no cis person would clock you as trans ever. From voice, maybe some people would think, like a small percentage, but like I'm pretty sure that you could make it through like day to day for months, and I don't think anybody would say anything or treat you in any way as a trans person ever. Do you think that would slowly start to change your mind, where people start to, where not people, I'm sorry, where you start to think that like, okay, I'm starting to feel some alleviation of the dysphoria, as opposed to being online where like your part of your identity is being a trans person?
yeah, I do think so. So there are all of these variables in my life that I think really amplify some of the dysphoria. So it's not just that I'm a very online person, but it's also that like a lot of my online existence depends on me looking a certain way.
Sure.
And I'm also like exposed to a lot of very beautiful people all the time. And so I do think this is a big problem. I think it's not just a problem for me, it's especially a problem for me. But I think that a lot of young people are in similar situations where they're exposed to a lot of stimulus that causes them to really doubt their body, to feel very insecure.
Can I ask a second question on that? And I don't envy your mind because this has to be impossible to sort through. But like, maybe is it possible that some of the things that you're experiencing and you think in your mind that these are dysphoria is actually just like female like dysmorphia, where the complaints you're having are like, I'm not a woman, people don't see me as a woman, I'm people see me as a man, blah 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 blah, because you're like thinking about the beauty standards, the makeup, like how you present yourself. What if you have transitioned and you actually did it really well, and now what you're experiencing are just women problems, where they're like, my makeup isn't good enough, I don't look feminine enough, I don't look like a woman. Like, do you think you would be able to disentangle those two ideas in your head of like, what is the problem of because like here's something that I think is possible for you. I don't know, you can tell me, right? But like, I feel like it's possible that you could go into the mirror and have you ever seen yourself ever? Have you ever thought in your mind, today I look like an ugly woman? Or are you always thinking, today I look like kind of a man? Like, have you ever felt like an ugly woman before, or do you always just feel manly? And then if that is the case, that no, I kind of just feel manly, is it possible then that you actually did transition really well and you've made it, but you just, in your mind, you don't have that feeling yet of like, well, I am a woman and sometimes I can look like an ugly woman, because you just default to thinking that you're a man. Does that make sense? Sorry, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think that it is often very difficult to disentangle regular everyday insecurity from transition-related dysphoria. I'll answer the question about, whether I perceive myself as a man or an ugly woman in a second. But I think that this is actually, and this is something I was trying to get to, it's an issue that a lot of people have, where I think a lot of people, a lot of young people are very insecure about themselves, and then they are exposed, or like, people will talk to them and they'll be like, well, some of the time people feel really insecure because they're trans, and the solution is to transition, and transition is going to fix that insecurity. And so I think that like one of the issues is that transition is sort of like prescribed as the fix for this insecurity when it's not really. And this is like why I say like, why I made the tweet like, do not transition. And of course we talked about like the nuances to that. But I think that like when we're talking about these other issues, you have to really make sure that like you're not transitioning to fix those other issues. And I think that like a lot of people, they will pursue these goals of passing, right? And like you can never get to that 100%. You can get 99 or 98, 99, almost to 100, but you won't quite get there. And because you're pursuing this goal of passing and not actually fixing the insecurity, you're not actually improving your mental health. And so really like the passing is a distraction for these other issues. And so
yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, and I think those are all really good conversations to have. I just think those are a little bit separate from trans things. This is one of the worries. Jesse Signal, I'm sure you know who this is, like writes about this a lot. This idea that like you can take a depressed teen that's a little bit confused and doesn't know 100% what they want to do in life, or what direction they should be heading, and they kind of get like swept into this trans stuff, and they're like, damn, like there's a whole community built for me. There's medications. There's a plan. Like there's some shit I can do. Depending on.
It's very comforting.
Yeah,
that can
for sure.
Feel really good.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially in the beginning.
And I think that can definitely be a problem. And I think that's something that has to be approached with great care. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. But on the flip side, like if you are trans and you are looking for that, like it's important to know that like even if you head in that direction, like there's still going to be other problems that you have to solve, right? This isn't going to be a catch-all. Even if you do transition perfectly, like now you have to deal with all the problems of being a woman, which can probably feel like trans problems sometimes too, or just like all the things that go along with a life that you haven't even lived yet, right? Because if you are if you become a trans woman even at an early age of 14, you said you started a transition. Even at that, you're probably having to play a lot of catch up with girls that started playing with makeup when they were 9, girls that started to feel a certain way about boys when they were like 11 or 12, like all the different like female experiences that you hadn't even had yet that you're playing catch up on and everything else. It's just like there's just like so much shit going on all the time that it's really complicated, whether you are or aren't even really trans.
Yeah, I agree. And this is why I give so much caution. Okay.
I think it's fine to give caution, but like when you're literally tweeting like, don't transition, it's
do
a
not
mistake.
Transition, all caps.
I hate myself.
It's so frustrating. I don't know. It's very frustrating. On the internet, I tend to just like output a lot of shit and a lot of like dysphoria and bad feelings. But I like never bring this up to like people that I hang out with in real life.
Sure.
Like I never talk about politics with like my IRL friends. And so part of that is like a coping mechanism where like I don't want them to think that I'm crazy. So I just like let people on the internet think that I'm crazy. But it is frustrating because I think that like my take about trans women in general not passing, I think is like accurate. And people are like giving me mental health checks on it where they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't think that thinking trans women don't pass as a rule is a mental health crisis. I think it's like basically what most people who aren't like woke believe. Like if you go and talk to people, most people will be like, yeah, like I think trans women are clockable, and whatever their conclusion is from that. So I don't think it's a crazy position to have this view of trans women, or an unusual one even.
Yeah, it's not crazy. I feel like the worlds that trans people live in, and everybody I know is online, so it's like so much different. But I feel like the online versus the offline world of trans people is like so much different. That's why it's like so crazy to me that like when I'm on these online spaces where they're like talking about the trans genocide and how all trans people are being killed and blah 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 blah. But like in real life, like things seem so much more chill with like every person I've spoken to that is trans or that like has trans friends, where like generally most of them have friends, they do decently, like a lot of them are like completely invisible, like people don't even know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you just need to touch grass.
Just need to chill out.
Just
I
need
mean,
to touch
here's the
grass.
other thing is
Yeah.
that like I think it goes both ways. Because I think that like these trans communities that are very insular and online and very, very far left,
Mm-hmm.
I think that they also like lose track of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this like thing that happens in the brain, and it's related to like the hedonistic treadmill. But it's also like the way that we understand our social status and the way that we understand our value
Mm-hmm.
is very relative to the people around us.
Yeah.
And so if you're in like a trans polycule and like everyone around you is hyping you up, saying that like you passed perfectly, and you don't actually, going out into the real world is going to be really, really hard.
Yeah, I agree.
And
This is a problem that everybody has with everything. It's one of the I get really upset. People will post in that sex subreddit, and people will say things like, "Oh, like my boobs are extremely lopsided. I have one A cup and one double D cup. Is anybody gonna care?" And every single comment is like, "Nobody will care. Guys are just happy to see any boobs ever. Nobody's gonna care. They all think it's gonna be beautiful." Blah blah blah. And it's like, bro, like I understand you guys are trying not to be mean, but like when this person goes out of the real world, like she's gonna get like a rude awakening when there are gonna be some people that do have like a big preference. And yeah, I do agree. I think that this, I don't know if this even counts as a hot take, but like when people are like in like trans polycules or when it's like a community of like 7 trans people or whatever, I think that's bad. I think having like a mix of friends is probably good because it keeps you more grounded. But especially some of these like streamer houses where like I think like the fucking demon mama doe and like there's like 7 or 8 like trans people all living together. I think your brain can go into some really weird places if you don't have people to kind of ground you out a little bit.
I definitely think it can be. I saw this TikTok a while ago from a trans woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she was upset because the person she was speaking to gendered her correctly, but she had the thought that even though they were gendering her correctly, referring to her with she and her, they didn't actually believe it. And
Yeah,
so we're at this point where people are like trying to intuit what's going on, not just from words, but what's actually going on in people's minds. And it's like destroying them.
kind
And I
of.
think
Yeah,
that like
well,
that mind reading is really dangerous. And I think it stems from this like this fragility where if you're not exposed to the fact that like some people are going to think you're a man and you're
mm-hmm.
not going to pass to some people,
Mm-hmm.
like if you're not exposed to that, if you don't learn to accept that, you're not going to be able to function in society.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The pronouns one is more complicated. Maybe somebody can share my opinion on this in the future, but I think that giving pronouns or listing pronouns, I think is a mistake. I think it's always been a mistake. I think that the big deal about pronouns is that when I refer to you as a she or a he, what I'm doing when I utter that pronoun is I'm giving you a glimpse into my mind and how I view you. So if you're listening to me talking about you to another person, like, oh, I really like Tab, like she's super cool, that kind of like reinforcement of like how I view you, it coincides with the mental image that you have of yourself. Whereas when I'm saying like, oh yeah, Taff, he's cool, I don't mind him, that's jarring because now there's this dissonance created where it's like, fuck, like you don't view me the way that I want to be viewed, and more importantly, the way that I view myself. That dissonance really bothers me. When we start giving pronouns, we're engaging in a form of delusion that I don't think actually makes the person feel better. Like, you don't want me to call you the right pronoun because you told me what your pronouns are. You want me to give the right pronoun because what I'm saying is showing that I have a mental image of you that is matching the mental image that you have of yourself. So I think that like if somebody is referring to somebody as like he or she, but they clearly don't pass or something like that is going on, or the person feels like it's not like a legitimate usage of pronouns, so like, I don't think you actually view me that way at all. I can understand why people would feel irked. Now, obviously it's shitty to call somebody out or be like, oh, fuck you, like you don't view me the right way or whatever. But like I could understand getting somebody upset with that. But I think that the issue there is just how we ever treated pronouns of like, oh, give your pronouns and blah, blah, blah in the first place. I think it betrayed the whole purpose of why pronouns even mean what they mean, in my opinion. Yeah.
That's a really interesting take. I'll have to think about that. I feel like the way that I think of pronouns is that they are a kind of like social nicety where when you use like a pronoun, what you're communicating is not necessarily that you like truly think of the person as a man or a woman or whatever, but basically that like you respect that person's agency to like decide for themselves what language should be used for themselves.
No, I totally reject that. I think that's bullshit. I know that that's like the
I feel
people.
like that is how people use pronouns, though.
That's people will say that, but I disagree. I just don't think that's the case. When somebody uses a pronoun, I don't think that you're looking for somebody to like respect your autonomy on language or any bullshit like that. I don't think so. I think what you're looking for is I want you to refer to me in a way that matches my mental model of myself. Like if I told people, if I went around saying like, I really want to be referred to as handsome. I like, can you please, like, I want to do it. And then I hear people in conversation like, oh yeah, I know Steven, like he's a handsome guy. That's whatever. But if I hear somebody say it without me prompting them to, and I know that they have that feeling of it, and if I view myself that way and then they say it, that feels good to me. Because now I know that what you said, what you've uttered is indicative. Your mental state, your mental image of me matches my mental image of myself. That's why I don't believe in the whole like respect the autonomy of like the language and all that bullshit. I just don't believe it. I think that pronouns are just it's a cute little clever grammatical trick that gives you an insight into how somebody views somebody. That's how I view it. I think that's true. But
Well, do you think it could be both and either one in different scenarios? Because I think that like when you are using the word she to refer to someone who like obviously doesn't look like a woman, and maybe has no intention to, I think that what you're doing is like this social nicety. You're not really expressing like your mental model of the person. And I think that when you automatically reach for a pronoun, like if someone who's like super transphobic like automatically reaches for the pronoun she when they're describing me, I think what they're doing is giving me a glimpse into their mind.
sure. I mean, there can be something nice that feels nice about the social nicety, but like, I could be wrong, but I feel like one of the most gender euphoric moments of any trans person in the history of all of trans people, dating back to the start of mankind, has got to be when Ben Shapiro was talking about, yeah, like Caitlyn Jenner, I don't remember, Bruce Jenner or whatever, when Shapiro was doing that and he was trying to misgender her and he fucked up and he said the pronoun that was actually in his mind of how because he
It might
did.
have been Laverne Cox.
It might have been Laverne, yeah, because you know that whoever he was referring to, he thought of that person as a woman, and he had to explicitly go out of his way to try to misgender that person after he fucked up doing it. That had to feel really good because you're like, I know you view me as a woman, and you're trying really, really, really hard not to play the game or whatever, but you do, like that's the image that exists in your head. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, obviously, I mean, all of it is complicated, and even if you are a trans person, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've like done like these huge like analysis of language and why do things feel the way they do. It's all like really complicated. I understand, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I was talking to that philosopher guy who I think you had on your stream and also Vosh debated
Agua.
about, yeah, classic moment. I was in his like Twitter DMs immediately after the Vosh discussion, and I think that I don't exactly remember how I phrased it, but I said that like within progressive communities and within progressive cultures, the way people define woman is as like a person who like prefers to be referred to as a woman or something like that.
Yeah,
which is like
cringe.
It's a definition that is like almost meaningless. But I think that like pronouns also take on a unique like definition within very progressive communities. And that's why people like do use neo pronouns or like it or dear or whatever, because like it's no longer about this like automatic reflex and more about this kind of like ability to exert your identity on others and have them refer to you as you prefer.
Yeah, I guess I go back to like I think that's what names are for. Having somebody refer to me as name. I mean, a name is one thing because it shows respect, but I think the pronoun is a little different. It reminds me of the ContraPoints thing that she said a long time ago, that like something that can feel very othering is when you're with a group of like very progressive cis women and they're like, okay, everybody go around and say your pronouns, and you know,
this happens to me in real life.
yeah, and the only
where I've like talked to
reason
someone and she's like, oh, what are your pronouns? By the way, let's have a pronoun check for everyone. And I'm like, I want to die.
exactly, yeah, and it's like I'd rather just go to some bar with a bunch of like redneck Nazis where they just call me she, because that's like it just feels so much better than like the pronoun circle shit. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's complicated, but
It's brutal. I'm friends with like all cis people in real life right now.
Okay, yeah.
All my IRL friends are cis. And it used to be that they were all trans. And I had the thought, I need to get some perspective because I feel like trans people are like making me crazy. And then
Online
maybe
trans people, clarify that, because I feel like real life trans people
No,
are so
but-
much more chill, unless you're like in a fucking college fucking with 100 non-binary women or whatever. But or do you think
Then
you
I,
meet a lot of
I
crazy trans
moved,
people?
listen, I
Uh-huh.
moved to Texas of all places and made friends with cis people. And turns out I'm just as unhinged. So
Sure. Well, I mean, you might be unhinged, but the question is, are you unhinged because you're trans, or are you just unhinged because you're a Taftaj? You know?
true, true. Good point. Okay. Those are some of my crazy takes. I'm surprised you didn't push back more regarding like HRT and me saying that it's like the evidence is not that strong.
It's not. I always fight against people that say that because you have to couch your language very carefully. Anytime somebody wants to come on and be like, oh no, we have very, very good scientific evidence concerning adolescent. Blah, stop. Whatever you're about to say is not true. We don't have very strong evidence for almost anything regarding trans people, even adults for transition. And like in terms of doing this en masse, all of it is pretty new. The therapies and the like the actual therapy, not just the drug stuff, but they're talking all of that too. All of it is very new. All of it is experimental. Everybody's trying new stuff. Like opening this up to kids en masse is very new. All of it is super new. So anybody that comes out and tries to say like 100% like, oh yeah, this is obviously blah, blah, blah. Like, no, that's bullshit. Nobody knows that. Like it's all still new. We have to be honest about it. And yeah, and be careful like going forward.
Okay, that's interesting. I feel similarly, and it's one of the reasons why I think that people, especially adults, they should have like the freedom and the right to do with their body, what they will. And part of that is, I think, the right to take hormones if you want. But I also think that like because the evidence is so new, I think it is okay if I look back at my own personal experience and then tell people like, I don't recommend this, or I only recommend this if you've already explored these avenues.
Yeah, I think that proceed with caution, I think, is really good, especially because it's so fucking politically charged today. And it seems like there's somebody else said something really politically incorrect that I super agree with, but it really does feel like if I'm like a white cis male, my identity sucks online for like farming anything. But as soon as I throw that non-binary tag on, or hopefully this doesn't happen, but like becoming trans, it unlocks so much community and openness and everything to you that like, as cringe as it is to say, like white men don't really have access to anymore unless you're gonna go be a Tate fan or like a Jordan Peterson fan or whatever. And I'm worried that type of stuff is becoming a little bit too much. Yeah, I got really traumatized getting all the emails from trans women about like all the fucking NB women on college campuses now that like, I thought that like maybe there'd be like some problems with it, but like email after email after email is telling me that like 98% of these spaces are like NB women now or NB they, them, Zers or whatever, that like there's very few trans people even like seeking transition in these spaces, that like finding a trans person that's trying to medically transition was rare in a lot of these college trans support groups. And it's like, what the fuck? So yeah, be careful. The online shit is wild. Yeah.
It gets pretty crazy. Yeah, the trans community has just changed so much since when I came out. And I think that it is definitely frustrating. I think it has to do with this like tearing down of all sorts of boundaries and like definitions and all these like ideas of the past, right? Like I think when I was transitioning and even before then, people who are trans women, when they wanted to transition, they had a real sense in their mind of what it meant to be a woman, and vice versa with men, and the kinds of expectations that came with that. And those are valuable. Like those stories of like what it means to be a good man, those are really valuable. And without them, I think that's how we get people like Andrew Tate, these like red pillars who are filling this void where for, decades, we've sort of eroded the idea of what it means to be a man. We have torn down these shibboleths that existed of the past. And sometimes that was good. Sometimes those ideas of masculinity were toxic. But losing those, especially in the digital age where the relationships we have with people are so different, I think that there are all these characters like Andrew Tate and other red pill type people who have come in to fill that void, and it's been really destructive. And I think it's one of the reasons why we need these kinds of categories of, what it means to be a man or a woman to exist and to have real cultural value.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I don't disagree. It's really weird that the crowd that acknowledges that like we need representation for black people, for women, for all of these minority groups is so important. But then when it comes to like white men, it's like, fuck you guys, like you're all toxic rapists. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know why you expect them to not need representation or all the same things that the minority people do. And then they get surprised when they all join like fucking Nazi Tate cult groups and everything. It's like, okay, well.
I think it's pretty fucking crazy. I also think that like the Tate arrest is kind of inevitable. And it's crazy to me to see people like running insane lines of defense where they're like inventing stories for how he could be totally innocent. And it's like, maybe he's innocent, but like everything that he said is like super incriminating and like not good.
Yeah, if there were, again,
does not indicate good things.
I'm glad this happened the way that it did because it's like so perfect because this would be one of those things where I was like, dude, if Biden or Hillary or if anybody had videos like this or anything, you guys would be making so much up. So it's really funny now that like my dream scenario came true where it's like he's got a video series on how to sex traffic and defraud women. And I wonder if you would believe that. And they're still like, no, I don't think it's true. I think he's being set up. And it's like, it couldn't be more obvious than this. Like, it's so obvious how much you guys are like meat riding. Like, it's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Fucking crazy.
But wait, hold on. This is not true.
Yes.
I just read in the chat. You're not actually a Matt Walsh fan, are you?
There was like a week in March or something that I listened to his podcast every morning. I don't know if I'd say I'm a Matt Walsh fan, but I did listen to his podcast.
Millions
and then
of trans kids on puberty blockers. Millions, he said. Millions. After doing a full documentary on it. Millions. Do you see the poll where it's like Americans think that like 24% of fucking Americans are trans?
And it's like 30% are from New York, 30% are from California, and 30% are from Texas.
Jesus.
And it's like, yeah, the poll's just like insane. I think it's like the YouGov poll. It was always insane. I have other crazy opinions, but I don't want to take up too much of your time.
You have roles for my one main room, right?
Wait, what?
You have roles for that main room I've got, right?
I do. So
okay, yeah. If I'm around there, you can always just like jump in. Don't DM me. Just like hop in and start screaming. Yeah.
Steven, tell me why I'm wrong. That's what I'm going to be like.
Yeah, exactly. Hell yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Destiny.
Okay, have fun. See you later, buddy.
You too.
Bye. Loser.